This is a video review of the NCTech Iris360. It's a 360-degree camera. It's not a 360-degree video camera, so just still images. It's approved by Google Street View, so that's the main purpose of it, is doing 360 photographs. But you can use the images on Facebook, embed them in virtual tours and things like that. I've had this camera about a month now. I've tested it indoors, outdoors, various different lighting conditions, and tried pretty much all of its different modes. I'll say straight off the bat, I'm 50-50 about the camera. It's a lot of money. It's about £1,500 ex VAT, so knocking on like £1,800 for this camera. I've spent that much twice before on other cameras, on a video camera, on a still image camera, but this doesn't feel like a very polished product, and there's some major problems with it. That said, I have got good images out of it. It is usable, but I wouldn't say it's reliable. I'm a bit scared about doing the first professional job with it. And there's just some things that are a bit irritating about it, but we'll have a look through, see what it's all about, and yeah, maybe just a few basics about it. Firstly, it's got 4 cameras, so when you take an image, you just take it once, basically. It just sits there and it'll do almost a full 360 view. There's a little bit of space underneath at the bottom that it will not capture, but that's not particularly important. Not often when people on Google Maps do they go and look at the floor, so it's not going to make much of a difference. Probably the main thing that we would want to know about the camera would be the image quality, and this could be better. For the application that I want to use it for Google Maps, most people are viewing these things on a phone screen. Maybe the biggest screen is a tablet. Occasionally they might look at it in a browser. So for that screen size, it's okay. The image quality, but there are clear signs of, well, a lack of sharpness, a lot of noise even at relatively low ISO settings. Some chromatic aberrations. If there's a high contrast image, bright lights, you're going to see lots of that. Color reproduction is not amazing. So it's not an incredible high quality camera. Looking at some of the other much cheaper 360 cameras, some that only have, 2 cameras on them, it's comparable. So the Ricoh camera, is not too far off. There's a lot of features the Ricoh camera doesn't have that this does, but it could be better. It should be better, especially with 4 cameras. But the actual cameras inside, I don't know what they are, but they're not particularly amazing. The kind of main selling point for me on this camera was the fact that it does HDR, or high dynamic range. Very simply, if you're taking a photograph in an area where there's a very bright window, and then indoors it's pretty dark, this camera will take 6 or even 9 photographs at various different exposures. And then it'll blend those photographs together to give you a more even exposure. And I find that does work well. There's 2 modes, HDR and HDR+. I'd say I lean towards just using HDR+. It does take longer to take a photograph, but it doesn't take too much longer. To control the camera, it's controlled over Wi-Fi, so there's like very basic controls. not really even bothered to use. So obviously there's a power button that switches it on, and then there's a kind of a camera button that takes an image. But really the idea is that you'll use it on a mobile device. So I bought a kind of a tablet especially for it, and you basically install the NCTech app. You switch your camera on, you connect to the Wi-Fi network, so the camera has its own Wi-Fi network. You enter the password and then you control the camera from the tablet. That's very useful because it means that you can get out of the image, because there's no way to hide with the 360 photo. You have to kind of leave the room, hide behind a couch or something, and then you could just take the photo with the app. So that works kind of well. It's a good concept. The idea of using a separate device to take photos is very good, but the app leaves a lot to be desired. And really the app isn't just a way of taking a photo. It's got all of the settings for the camera, and that's where I find there's a lot of irritation. So really probably the two most negatives about this camera: some problems with the image quality, and the other big problem is the way that you can control it through the app. It just doesn't make sense in some places. But we'll have a look, and maybe I'll switch the camera on, we'll connect it up, and you'll be able to see what's going on in the screen, and I'll explain a few basics. Let's have a look at how long it takes to switch on the camera. Might as well just do that. So you just press the power button at the top. I've not made any changes to the camera apart from I've stuck little bits of black tape on the lights. There's 4 lights on all 4 sides, and I find that sometimes when I'm working in a public place, these lights are incredibly bright. It bothers people. It bothers people that they think you're taking a photo of them, even if you're not. They're just way too bright, so I'll just cover them up with some tape. The next thing I got to do is connect to the Wi-Fi network. So I'm just going to go down here, connect to it, hope for connection. And when I say hope for connection, it's always connected to the Wi-Fi network on my phone and on my tablet. But 3 different times I've been out, I've, prepared the day, I've kind of gone out, gone to a place I want to take a photo. I've not brought my tablet, I've just got my phone. I've connected to the Wi-Fi network, and the app just does not connect to the camera. And I can't explain how worrying that is, because if that was a paid-for job and I had to show up and I literally couldn't take photos, that would just lose me that client. I mean, if I was that client, I would never use me either. There's no excuse for it, but it's only ever happened on my phone. I don't know if there's something funny with my phone. I don't get any other problems with any other apps on my phone, but it must be something with the phone and this device, because it always works on the tablet. So let's have a look. I've opened up the app, it's connected, and these are the main controls. So here we go. At the top, obviously the image space, it connects to, records to an SD card or micro SD card. The amount of available images differs depending on the quality that you're choosing. There's the battery charge. I'll talk about the battery later on. But let's go through some of these main things. And first we'll start at this top left setting over here. Manual or auto. So this is one of the things that really bothers me about this camera. So in manual mode, you control the shutter speed and you control the ISO. The aperture is fixed, so you're not going to be controlling that. But there is absolutely no way to really tell what exposure you need. I have no idea right now if I need a quarter or a 60th of a second. I don't know what ISO. I've tried all kinds of things. I even got my SLR and kind of tried to match up, okay, if my SLR needs this many, you know, this much ISO and, you know, this shutter speed with an aperture of f4 constantly, could I link it to the camera somehow and work out what the camera needs? There's no linking it. There's no way of working it out. The only way of working it out is to actually take a picture. So on the camera, you got to take a picture. Now it takes a long time to take an HDR image. If you want to do that, so you'd have to go to HDR off over here. You'd, you know, take the photograph, and okay, I've taken the photograph. We'll see how long it takes to judge. So basically, you've got to take a photo, look at the exposure, and then realize, oh, it's a problem. Like, I've taken a really, really, really dark image here. So what do? I have to go back to camera and guess, okay, maybe half a second exposure, and take another image. And, you know, maybe if you're lucky, you'll get the right exposure in 2 or 3 guesses, but I mean, it takes a long time. And every time you're going to move the camera to take another image, you're going to have to do that again because you're in, you know, a different light space. It's probably going to be a slightly different exposure required. So looking at this might roughly, maybe, the right exposure. It's hard to tell. So I'd just say the manual mode is useless. So we'll go over to auto mode so that the camera automatically decides. Except, while the manual mode is manual but really doesn't help you, the auto mode isn't fully auto because it controls the shutter speed, but you still have to choose an ISO setting. So it doesn't auto ISO. So if I say set it to 100 ISO and took an image, it might not be able to control that shutter speed far enough. It might not be able to do a long enough exposure, or for the ISO is too high, a short enough exposure. So you can't then be 100% sure. But we'll see. I mean, it's easier. It's more likely to work. Looking at this, it's way overexposed it. So, you know, it's hard to really ever get a correct exposure. Now this is with HDR off, and I don't use the HDR off mode. I might if it didn't suck so badly with the exposure, but even if it did expose properly, the built-in, the inherent dynamic range of the camera is shocking. It's atrocious. I've not used a camera that has such bad inbuilt standard HDR in, I don't know how many years. Maybe the very first digital cameras that I owned had that kind of an image. So it's pretty shocking. So you kind of have to use the HDR mode. And really you should push it from the HDR on to HDR plus. Because that's going to do 9 exposures, and you're going to it's much more likely to get a good image out of that. I pretty much always get a decent image out of HDR plus. So there's that. Except if you choose HDR plus, the camera will not stitch it, or really show you a decent preview of the image. Obviously, because I mean, to process 9 exposures from 4 cameras, that's too much for the camera, which is understandable. But when you're taking the photos, you're just kind of hoping that you're getting a good shot. So really, I think on bigger jobs, what I'm going to have to do is take a Windows laptop. It's going to have to be Windows. Take test photos, then swap out the micro SD card, process them, which takes a while, and then check that way. And it's time consuming, but there's no other way around it. If this app somehow just showed the exposure or could control the ISO, it would just make it a bit easier. So if you're going to use this camera, you need to use it quite a bit. You need to practice with it quite a while to get an idea of what ISO to use when. So you just need to somehow, like photographers had to do, 100 years ago or something like that, is really kind of look at the scene, judge how much light there is, and then just know the settings. I mean, you could buy a light meter. I don't have one, and I don't feel the need that, in 2017 that I should have to own one of those. So that bit's kind of disappointing. Otherwise, the capture modes, instant timer 50-50. The 50-50 means that it just does two, it uses two of the cameras at a time. So you could stand on one side, take a photo, stand on another, take another, the other half of the photo. Relatively useful. You can choose, where to use the GPS signal from, so from your mobile device or from the camera itself. I just tend to use the mobile device. I haven't tested the accuracy on the GPS, but I just use the mobile device because on this I can just look at Google Maps, make sure I'm in the right place. Let's have a look. So I'll leave it on auto. I'll do HDR+. Let's see what happens when you take an HDR+ image, because this is how I'd recommend you use the camera. But there's some things I'm not entirely happy about with this either. So I'm going to take the image. So it's going to take probably 9 photographs. So this takes a bit of time. We can, I'll have a look when I'm editing this video. We'll work out exactly how much time this actually takes. But it's good to kind of see what you get when you take one of these photos. It does take a while, so it is 9 photos. Okay, it started to process. So that's the 9 photos taken. It then tells you can move the camera. So if you're doing a couple of shots, we could then take this camera, put it somewhere else, be setting up the next shot while the app does its thing, because I can't take another photo yet. It says processing, and then you get an image that will not look good. Don't worry, that doesn't mean there's a problem with it. It just shows you one of the exposures. It doesn't merge them together, and so you're left kind of guessing, hoping that the image will be okay. So that's the amount of time it takes. We're now ready to take another photo. So, not super quick, not super slow. And that's kind of it for the app. Going through settings over here, you can choose things like resolution, auto power off, date and time, firmware updates and things like that. So that's basically it for the app. I mean, there's other things I've not mentioned, but that's the real core of it. So I think something that could be really improved by NCTech is just taking control of the ISO. So letting the app kind of choose. I mean, it must be judging somehow. There must be some exposuring system. I think it could be done with an update to the app, or maybe an update to the app and the firmware, but please just take control of the ISO settings so that the auto mode is auto. With HDR+, even if you're a professional photographer, it's fine to do the auto mode and just have that set up. That's the correct way to do it, I think, for this camera. So just a few other bits with hardware and how this works. So one thing, I mean, really kind of bothers me a bit, but the SD card. So if I just pull this out, well, the micro SD card, so there's a little slot. As you can see, it's just very small. And if you're not careful, this can just pop out. So it's a really unusual system. Like, I just don't know. This just feels really loose. And when you push it in, you kind of, the SD card bends or just sits a little bit and then doesn't quite go into the socket, so you have to hold the kind of camera straight. It just looks like really poor design, like someone's first industrial design project or something. That this it's just stupid, and I don't know why they've got a micro SD card. Even if it had just been a slot for a normal SD card, maybe one that you could press in and then it pops out. Even if it's not covered, that would have been better. The camera's not very heavy. It's got a standard tripod mount at the bottom, which is pretty standard. You charge it over here. And let's talk a little bit about charging and battery, because this is something you need to be careful of and doesn't make much sense. There's a battery on the side here. You can buy a super overpriced charger for this from NCTech. It's a ridiculous price. You can also buy another battery, also really expensive. These batteries, I mean, it's got a, you know, it can show you the charge. Not that you can't see that through the app. These are three 18650 batteries inside of this, I'm guessing, I'm pretty sure. It's a decent battery, but the replacement cost or cost of buying a second is ridiculous. The cost of the charger is ridiculous. So I'm not going to do that. The battery should last, you know, a full shoot easy. But the main problem I have with this is that when you get home, switch the camera off, and the camera keeps draining the battery. So I think there's a little switch on the side that you could try and remember to, you know, switch off. But she just makes no sense. I mean, if it's switched off, it should be switched off, shouldn't be draining the battery, and that's caught me out before when, you know, I'd been working the day before. I could remember I had 60% battery and I just wanted to go out and take a few photos. I went out, tried to switch this thing on, battery was drained a day later. So just another thing that just seems to point to the direction that this was made kind of on a budget, and feels like a beta, like a really developed prototype. It just doesn't quite feel ready and finished. And damn it, you should expect a finished, solid, reliable product for 1,600, 700, 800 pounds. It's a lot of money, and to spend that much and then get all these kind of weird problems makes the camera hard to recommend. But I'm not sending it back, and really maybe the best thing about this camera, sadly, is the lack of competition. Now, there are other 360 cameras out there, but those tend to be just for home use, for going on holiday and things like that. And I've looked at all of them. They're a lot cheaper usually. There's no one by Samsung. Ryko one's pretty good. But they're just not quite up to the level that you'd use them professionally. The other option, the option that most people go for, is to use an SLR camera with an wide or ultra wide lens, a special tripod attachment. Funny enough, you could probably set that up for the cost of this camera, and you'll get superior images. The problem with that, and what's held me back from that, because I have pretty much all of that kit, is the amount of time to take those photos. It takes a great deal of time to set that up, set up HDR on your camera, take the various different images, make sure that you're getting the right degrees and things like that. And then a big part of the time is spent then stitching that all together back in your studio or in a coffee shop somewhere. And it's not what I really want to offer people. I want to show up, take the images really quickly, and have high quality. And this isn't quite there yet. But really, maybe the best feature of the camera is its niche. Maybe they'll offer updates and something like that to the camera. Maybe they'll bring out a new edition. But that's my view on the camera. It probably comes across really, really negative. It is just all my opinion. If check up the facts on their website, you can see their test images. From a usability point of view, it really needs a lot of work. The app just seems not up to scratch. So I hope that's been useful. If you've got any questions, just leave them in the comments. And I hope that's been useful. Goodbye.